and welcome back to my channel. On this episode of Kind of Christian Cringe, I want to talk about people like the Duggars, the Plaths, the quiverful movement, the extremely evangelical conservatives, and how they harm their children, how I grew up in this environment, and how it is just all around a toxic environment in general, and they are driving their children away. Alright, for those of you who don't know, everybody knows who the Duggars are. The Plaths are another evangelical family that are on TLC. They have their own reality show on TLC. And I'm guessing, although they have not said it, they subscribe to the same movement as the Duggars, which is the quiverful movement. For those of you who don't know, it is an extremely conservative movement where the men are head of households. Girls do not go to college. You do not send your kids to school. Women are housewives. There is no birth control. The men are the ultimate authorities. There is a thing called courting where you actually don't date. You date for marriage where you're never alone. And there's handwritten letters in a lot of cases and telephone calls. And you don't actually know your partner before you're married to them. That sums up the quiverful evangelical movement in a nutshell for those of you who don't know. For those of you who also don't know, that happens to be the very environment in which I happen to have grown up in. It also has things like, if you know who Debbie Pearl is, the Pearls, it has discipline like that, like blanket training, and children should be absolutely submissive, and they do not allow for any sort of independent thought. Hold that thought. Alright, this is like my 8th video tonight, so I'm a little bit thirsty. But, they subscribe to all of that. And the environment in which that it leads for children is absolutely freaking toxic. Let me explain. I grew up on the outskirts of it, meaning that my mom subscribed to a lot of it, but she made a fatal mistake. She got divorced from her abusive husband, which means that she was shunned quite a bit, which allowed her to think outside of the box a little bit, which also kept me from being completely submersed in it, while other family members were more submersed into it. And it left a lot of people unprepared for the world, and it continually leaves people unprepared for the world. They homeschool their kids, and they homeschool them on a curriculum that does not teach science. It does not teach an accurate history. It teaches a pretty decent math and a pretty decent writing program. I had both of those. I had a pretty decent math and writing program, but history and science were a joke, and I'm still, luckily I was always into history, so that part, but they encourage homeschooling because they don't want the outside influences of the world getting a hold of their kids. And what they mean by outside influences is independent thought. It is so much about suppressing independent thought. You are not allowed to go against your parents. You are not allowed to think differently than your parents. They are training you into adulthood to where you take what has been drilled into your head and then toxically pass it on to your own children, and it is a giant cycle of abuse. It also puts so much pressure on young girls. Let me give you an example, and I've talked about this before. The church that my ex went to, whose mother was definitely a little I had a knee-length jean skirt, and I had a cute little figure. I could show you pictures from when I was 15 to probably about 26. It's a tiny little thing, and I was cute. And I had a nice little butt that I worked very hard for. And my nice little figure was considered tempting to grown men at the ages of 15. I was tempting men in their 40s. I was 15. I was a child. And they deemed that skirt too tempting for the grown men in the church. They put the thoughts of grown men on my little 15-year-old self. Me personally, I think that grown men shouldn't be checking out children. That's my thought. But, what do I know? They also seem to think that, we'll get into that later. But, yeah, they put that. So they wanna create these little clones that do their own thing, or that don't do their own thing and don't think. And they're dressing modestly. No pants. I wore a lot of pants. I love pants. But if you did wear pants, they needed to be dress pants. They couldn't be tight-fitting. Leggings were a big no-no because it showed too much of your figure. If you believed in any sort of science, that was frowned upon. Being too smart was frowned upon. They wanted girls that were dainty and didn't think for themselves and didn't speak up. I got in trouble for being too opinionated, too loud, and again, back to too opinionated. I mean, that was a huge problem for me growing up in that environment. I thought for myself, I questioned things, and that made me a bad, ungodly, rebellious woman. On the show, Welcome to Plathville, they talk about the whole rebellious thing quite a bit, and it's code like my blood boils when they try to say nicely that they're being rebellious or they have character flaws. That is their way of toxically telling people that what they are doing is going to send them to hell. And they will use the threat of hell to terrify you into compliance. And that is awful to me. They also do not encourage actual relationships with the opposite sex. So when you go into a marriage, you don't know your spouse, you don't know anything about sex, you don't know how to communicate, you don't even know what consent is. Because one of the biggest things that you are taught in the quiverful movement is that your husband, you are the only one that can give your husband that particular thing. So you have to give it to him even if you don't want to. Be always ready and willing and be sweet and meek about it. Because he can, if he's not getting it from you, he will go elsewhere. No. Let me tell you something. My husband made a commitment to me when he married me. And that commitment was to be faithful. If he cannot keep then that's on him, not me, and not the amount of times that him. It's not. But they put that kind of pressure on girls, and they don't let them understand that they have the right to say no, and that consent is an actual thing. Consent is not taught. Consent is something that is frowned upon, honestly, because women are not supposed to enjoy it. They're not supposed to talk about it. All of those things. It is all about the man. And you see that in the Duggars, you see that in Plathville, you see that in everything. It also encourages abuse, because when a woman is abused within the church, I will give you an example. My dad was a drunken douche canard. It was not safe for my mom to remain married to him. He also had multiple affairs. And people actually encouraged my mom to stay married to him. They didn't have to live together, but they had to stay married because, and these are just things I heard growing up, because once you're married, and that's it. You should not have to be married to your abuser. You should not be tied to a person who treats you like crap. They should not encourage that. Yet they do. They also encourage disowning your children. You see it kind of in Welcome to Plathville. They kick their 17-year-old daughter out of the house because she's too rebellious. Because, she wants to have a life on her own. She wants to go to college. And we'll get into the college thing in a minute. They do not want independent thought. So if you have an independent thought, they will kick you out. They will shun you and they will leave you on your own for having a thought that isn't theirs. They also encourage this toxic behavior towards children. I'm going to use Debbie Pearl's blanket training as an example, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that I witnessed growing up in the church myself. Blanket training, for those of you who don't know, is where you put a child that is only a few months old that is crawling on a blanket, and you encourage your child to come off the blanket after you tell them no. You tell them to stay on the blanket, and then you try to entice them with toys and things that they're interested in. And when they do, you hit them with something. They encourage, I think, if I remember correctly, it's some sort of piping, rubber piping they encourage you to hit your infant child with when your child leaves the blanket, because that teaches your child to stay and it breaks your child. They literally, multiple churches talk about breaking your child. You have to break your child. You have to break your child's spirit. That's abuse. These churches are encouraging parents to abuse their children, to beat their children to the point their children submit. Another example, my ex's little brother, we were playing Uno, I think, at the dining room table. And my ex's, and he was 17 at the time, my ex's little brother, who would have been 14 at the time, told his mom about something that they had done years ago that he had been punished for, but my ex had actually done. She went into the dining room, grabbed a wooden spoon, put her 17-year-old child over her knee, and hit him like 5 times to teach him not to lie for something he did like 4 or 5 years prior to that. That is not healthy. That is not normal. The other thing that that is not healthy and is not normal that they encourage is the abstinence-only courting, dating thing. And I've spoken and I keep speaking on it because it bothered me. Prime example is the I Kiss Dating Goodbye book. There are several other books where they teach things like even having you have to read let me give you an example of one. If you have an admission in your sleep, they will then make you read the Bible and copy lines before you go to bed because you are having impure thoughts before you go to bed, which caused you to have that dream, which is sinning. You're sinning for having a dream and having a nocturnal admission in your sleep. That was something that was highly, highly taught to the people around me. Self-pleasure was also bad. And dating was only done in groups. So you never actually got to know your spouse. You were in a group, you never had one-on-one time. Phone calls were monitored, letters are monitored. All of that is completely and totally monitored. And then when you do get married, and we go back to the whole you're not hot consent thing, you are also told to have as many children as possible, even if it hurts your health and you don't have the money to support them. Prolapsed uteruses are common. Women dying in childbirth were common and is still common amongst these movements. They also don't have children in hospitals necessarily. I know lots of women that like to use midwives and have home births, which is perfectly fine if you are stable enough to have a home birth. I kind of like home births, but not if you have baby after baby after baby and your uterus is paper thin and you and your baby could die. We've seen that on the Duggars, where they have pushed that to the absolute limit and nearly killed one of their daughters. I guess my point is, quiverful is toxic. When you support shows like the Duggars, when you support shows like Welcome to Plaths, you're not actually supporting a wholesome TV show. You're supporting a toxic environment that encourages abuse of children, does not teach consent, so it encourages assault on married women because they don't have the right to say no to their husband, encourages misogyny, and it's just all around really, 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 really bad. I could probably go on for an hour about my experiences growing up in the conservative, quiverful, evangelical movement. But again, I was lucky enough to have a mom who wasn't completely in it, so I was on the outskirts. I got to witness most of it without being as heavily affected as others who are still trying to discover and get out of it themselves. And I can tell you, when you do get out of it, it is a mind-boggling experience, and the whole entire world being opened up to you is terrifying, because I think you thought you knew, you didn't know. And yeah. All right, guys, that was kind of a rambly thing. I just wanted to talk about it because I'm currently watching Welcome to Plaths and taking notes. I will probably do another video talking about it later. I don't know. But I will see you later.